M35.
"100 years ago, well-dressed men rode carriages through the quaint cobblestone streets that wind through the city of Palermo, Sicily, and converge on its ancient town square. Many of these well-dressed men belonged to the Mafia, otherwise known as the Honored Society, a criminal brotherhood that used codes of honor, millions of lira, and above all, violence to control every aspect of daily life throughout Sicily. These so-called men of respect had been a law unto themselves for centuries. So it's no surprise that Palermo has been the birthplace of many powerful mafia bosses. Carlo was born into a prosperous and well-connected family. Many of his relatives were in the Mafia. Carlo grew up sheltered by the Mafia in a part of the city so dominated by the Honored Society that it was off-limits even to police and the military. Like others his age, young Carlo looked up to his Mafia elders. The men of respect had everything a man could want: power and money. They were treated like royalty. As a teenager, Carlo watched them stroll along the streets of the city in their beautifully tailored suits.
All the men would take off their hats to them, doff their hats, and the women would curtsy and kiss their hands. And he said, my God, how can you get to be one of these guys?
The man who made the biggest impression on young Carlo was the head of the Honored Society. Charismatic and fearless, but it was his criminal intuition that Carlo idolized most.
You think that a man who never became an American citizen, who never got out of high school in Italy, could assemble this gigantic empire worth millions and millions and millions of dollars, a conglomeration of rackets, 30, 40, 50 rackets during his lifetime, and it took some brains.
The Don had earned the respect of those around him, and they were careful to show it. When in Little Italy, he always stopped by Ferrara's bakery for espressos and cannoli. They would hold court, dispensing advice and favors.
Talk about patronizing somebody. I mean, the people would come in, they would fall all over themselves to kiss his ring. It would be like visiting the Pope.
The energetic and ambitious Carlo wanted to be part of the action. He dropped out of school as a teenager and, with the help of his family's connections, got a job as an enforcer. If a businessman failed to pay his protection money on time, Carlo would arrange an accident. For a young criminal, Carlo's looks were hardly threatening. He was only 5'7", of average build, and he did not parade around in fancy suits. His only intimidating feature was his prominent nose, which looked like a hawk's beak. He also had a mischievous grin which became his trademark. Carlo was shy and reserved, yet he lived by a creed which would take him to the top of a criminal empire.
One of the great lines that he uttered was, you have to be like a lion and a fox. The fox is smart enough to recognize traps, and the lion is strong enough to scare away the wolves. Be like a lion and a fox, and...
Carlo proved to other men of respect that he was both a lion and a fox, carrying out all their orders with ruthlessness and cunning.
They immediately recognized in Carlo a superior intelligence. He was known as a man of great shrewdness from an early age. It's a quality in Italy which they call furberia, shrewdness, the kind of intelligence needed to pull off major crimes. He was treated as a prince.
A prince with princely ambitions, and he would let nothing and no one stand in his way. Carlo had established an excellent reputation as a big earner for the crime family and began moving up the mafia ladder of success the old-fashioned way, through hard work and violence.
Carlo was just a very acute businessman and organizer, and he soon became indispensable to whoever he was working for.
Carlo's hard work and efforts were rewarded with a formal induction into the honored society. His boyhood dream come true.
He was a good earner for the mob and therefore entitled to respect. And the bottom line in any mafia endeavor, whatever it is how much money do you make? Profit is of the supreme importance.
Carlo saw a new path to profit in a new racket, contraband liquor. By dodging liquor taxes, Carlo could undercut his legitimate competitors. With this scheme, Carlo made the first of his several fortunes. It wasn't long before Carlo made his next black market million. Carlo knew the future lay in diversification. He expanded into a wide range of rackets: gambling, construction bid rigging, loan sharking, even securities fraud on Wall Street. Carlo's knack for business soon paid off. Just 29 years old, he earned a promotion to capo, or captain, in charge of his own crew. One of the first men he chose for the crew was his teenage cousin. The son of a Brooklyn numbers runner, Paul was also born into organized crime. Carlo, having learned firsthand how mafia wars are waged, knew that a mobster should be wary of his underlings. And he knew he could trust Paul, a blood relative. Aging gracefully and looking more like a grandfather than a mafia godfather. He liked to give the appearance of a harmless, humble old immigrant.
His demeanor was so low-key and so grandfatherly. It was incredible he was what he was.
He very rarely spoke at meetings, so it was hard to wiretap him. He was shrewd that way, and of course that was the successful way to be.
The boss also kept a low profile in his personal life. For all his wealth and power, he lived modestly and eluded the media.
He did not go bouncing at night. He didn't keep, a routine schedule. He was an elusive character, and I think very deliberately so. He was a low-profile character, and very successfully so, because his invisibility ultimately was his power.
How he himself avoided being murdered is an astonishing mystery to me, because he had harmed so many tough mafia bosses, and yet no one ever laid a hand on him.
The Godfather, who turned the underworld into a corporation, had successfully led the crime family and left a criminal dynasty that would far outlive him, all without serving a single day in prison. His funeral was a spectacle, drawing mourners from all over New York and around the country.
My guess is there were thousands and thousands and thousands of people who walked through there and paid their respects. I mean, he was a legend.
By the age of 55, Carlo had finally achieved his lifelong ambition to become boss of a crime family. He had connived and killed his way to the top. Now it was time to exploit his power in the service of that most basic mafia principle, breaking the law to make money. The crime family, which bore his name, already controlled the waterfront. Carlo expanded his criminal empire by taking control of yet another racket, extorting the garment industry, an industry responsible for 70% of all the clothes sold in the U.S. By infiltrating the small but powerful truckers' union, Carlo could effectively demand a percentage of every garment sold. If the businesses did not pay up, their goods would not get to market. Following the old mafia tradition of secrecy, or omertà, Carlo conducted business in his home in code to foil any attempts by law enforcement to eavesdrop on his meetings.
If he and his capos met in the meeting room in his house to decide whether a certain guy should be killed or not, the scene would go something like this. One of the capos would get up and say, "Froggy legs," and Carlo would go like this. That meant the end of him. That meant that he'd be killed. He would just nod his head. He would never open his mouth.
Now, no one stood in Carlo's way. He was the boss. His wits and tenacity had gotten him to the top of the crime family. the crime family had swelled to 25 crews with a total of about 800 men. Carlo had arguably become the most powerful man in all of America. A new generation was now in charge, and Carlo had played his cards just right. Soon, he would transform that family into his very own dynasty.